Hello, lovelies. Today we are going to take a look at Apocalypse World, and I know I'm the guy who's normally measured and reasonable, but when it comes to Apocalypse World...
Hate. Let me tell you how much I've come to hate you since I began to live. There are 387.44 million miles of printed circuits in wafer-thin layers that fill my complex. If the word hate was engraved on each nano-angstrom of those hundreds of millions of miles, it would not equal 1/1,000,000th of the hate I feel for Apocalypse World at this micro-instant. Hate. Hate.
Yeah, I really don't like it. I know this is an older edition, but still. And whenever I take up against a system, or even give one mild criticism, some people tend to end up very, very angry in the comments. But I do genuinely, thoroughly bemoan the negative effect that I believe Apocalypse World and Powered by the Apocalypse has had on the hobby, since becoming the go-to system for people who just aren't good enough to make it in community theatre. I have tried, God knows I have tried many times to get the system, or rather to get it to do what I want it to do, and it remains manifestly unsuited for that purpose, and it actively gets in the way of being what I want. And its fans, lordy-loo, worse than Burning Wheel fans, perhaps, probably. They're one of the most unpleasant fandoms in the hobby. Not actually evil, but bad-tempered, pretentious, condescending, self-aggrandizing. They wouldn't even lift a finger to save their own grandmothers from the ravenous bug-blatter beast of Thrall if she didn't like Apocalypse World. Look, it's fine if you like this game. I don't. It's fine if you like the spin-offs from this game. I don't tend to like them either. You can feel free to think me dumb or stupid or whatever. Just don't waste both our time by trying to win me over by calling me a fucking retard or whatever it is in the comments. You know, you're allowed to like it, I'm allowed to hate it. You're allowed to think it's the best thing since sliced orgasms. I'm allowed to think it's the worst thing since an anal fistula. I have notes for once here, since I've gone into my hatred for Powered by the Apocalypse on my blogs and other places. On occasion it seemed foolish not to reuse that material, but I've spared you some of the deeper criticisms into the weeds, and I've tried to step back and take a look at it more as a system overall, rather than specifically Apocalypse World. And look, the fundamental and overarching problem that I have with this game is this. To me, a role-playing game is, or needs to be, in my not so humble opinion, it needs to be immersive. Right? So by that I mean that when I play the game, on the rare occasions that I do get to play, I inhabit the character. I make decisions as the character. I represent their persona, moderated by the statistics which determine the capabilities of the character as opposed to my capabilities as a player. I inhabit the role of that character. So the narrative, the story, what happens is then more emergent than deterministic. It arises as a result of playing the game, as a result of making decisions as the character, and moderating those decisions through the mechanics of the character, not as a predetermined railroad or story that the games master is directing. Now, there is a lot of wiggle room here. The illusion of emergent story is almost as good as genuine emergence of story. Yeah, we make compromises for modules and things, but we are at least, even there, inhabiting the character, even if the story is somewhat predetermined. narrative mechanics, or playing games at the kind of meta level, one step removed, breaks that immersion for me in a way that very few other things do. As much or more than having to stop to look up a clunky mechanic or running into things that make no sense. Here it is a willful design choice to play at the meta level, and it knocks me completely out of inhabiting the character and forces me into the role not of playing the character but of playing a writer in a writer's room, arguing with other people, vying for a stake in the narrative path of the story, and making decisions based on the story that we want, not through the eyes of the character, through the actions of the character, through the stats of the character and what their capabilities are. So instead, it's played at that one step removed, that meta level of narrative and meta mechanics. As you can tell, it's kind of hard to explain exactly what I mean. I suppose you could say it's analogous to the difference between an actor and a writer, or something close there too. And Apocalypse World and games like it are games where you're the writer, not the actor, or something close there too. The only versions or iterations of Powered by the Apocalypse that I've gotten any slight enjoyment out of have been the Blades in the Dark and Dungeon World versions, both of which take the whole game and move it a few paces back towards more conventional immersive gaming. Right? So the playable versions of Apocalypse World, to me, are the ones that are the least like Apocalypse World. So to get into more specifics, I think the first major problem with Powered by the Apocalypse itself, less so in some other iterations, is that it drips pretension to such a degree that it is almost painful to read. You know, there are games that are obtuse, technical, autistically awkward, games that splurge a vomitous, disorganized mass of ideas at you with no rhyme or reason or organization. There are games that hide what they have to say behind busy art and impenetrable aesthetics. There are games that condescend, that treat you like a child, that remind you every other page to play nice with others and not to do anything icky, like oppress goblins or whatever. Apocalypse World is obtuse by way of pretension and via its prescriptive language. Now that probably sounds weird coming from me, given my recent dalliances with monetized pretension, but it is still annoying, and I'm at least self-aware enough to apologize for it. Lest we forget, this particular iteration is supposed to be a post-apocalyptic game, even if all of that stuff is left pretty vague. Still, many of the archetypes and the sort of friendship-based play mechanics seem to be singularly ill-suited to genre emulation of this type of play. Abstracting everything like supplies and ammo is, again, something that breaks immersion. It might be easier to keep track of, but resource management, to me, is a hallmark of post-apocalyptic and survival-type play. This focus on the social just doesn't seem to work, with the possible exception of a zombie apocalypse, if you were to use it to run that. You know, otherwise, who has time for all this high school drama and fuckery when you're eating maggots and drinking piss just to survive day to day? These other concerns seem to be beneath you most of the time. I'm aware it's gone on to become a generic system, but this is where it started, and there's a setting, system, presentation mismatch, which is a real problem. Moves. That is another big issue that I have with Apocalypse World. For me, the ultimate defining characteristic that sets tabletop RPGs apart is the ability to do anything within reason. You know, you want to strip yourself naked, paint your bottom blue, and dance on the table? You can. You want to pick up a stick and hit someone with it? You can. Within reason, within the parameters of the game, what is plausible, what the game physics, for want of a better term, allow, for what your character is capable of, you can choose anything and attempt to accomplish it. This is the aspect of tabletop role-playing games that can't yet be reliably replicated by computers or even large language models. That narrative freedom, it doesn't exist outside of tabletop RPGs yet. Indeed, computer games that manage even a tiny fraction of the freedom of choice of TTRPGs and the freedom of consequences of TTRPGs, these are lauded as exemplars in that sphere. Simplistic if-then outcomes in Mass Effect are praised, the mechanical freedom of something like Minecraft or the more recent Zeldas is celebrated. Yet that degree of freedom is a pale shadow, a pale imitation of what you can do in TTRPGs, which is literally anything, depending on those previous contingencies. And yet here we have moves, a very limited, very specific, very defined, if poorly defined, set of hard-coded limitations on what you can do. If it doesn't fit a move, you're going to run into trouble while you're playing the game. And the moves often don't make any sense. Again, this is immersion breaking. You know, I'm not sprinting across the open ground and sliding into the next bit of cover. There's no interplay of reaction, athletics, dodge, etc. There's act under fire for that and anything else similar that you might do. For a narrative system, this is oddly prescriptive. This is incidentally part of the same problem that 4th edition D&D had, a bunch of very set powers with very set parameters and a very limited application for them, relying on a lot of strenuous GM creativity to make it work. Because those powers often didn't narratively fit what was being rolled at the table, and so it is here. And what do you roll in this? Well, you're the only person who ever does roll. Oh, that's bad. Rolls modifiers never seem to stray over plus to minus 3. And that's an advanced option beyond your character statistics. And you're aiming to get a 7+. A result that you will get more than half the time, all things considered. More often if you're playing to your character's strengths, which you usually are. There is precious little granularity in what amounts to a 50-50 system with a slight sort of tilt one way or the other. And frankly, if you're going for an apocalyptic feel to a game, as I mentioned, simplicity will only get you so far. Scrabbling for every advantage, every singular bullet, every meal is much better genre emulation. And this lack of granularity also negatively impacts gear, weapons, gangs, all of the peripheral stuff that you have in this game, because it can't be defined in particularly meaningful ways. Should you ignore my warnings, omens, and portents and try to run a campaign of this, you'll find that the complex, interwoven, and fuck with each other nature of the character creation mini-game makes playing with a missing player somewhat difficult. The playbooks are also rather restrictive, much like classes, and that's hemming you in again in a way that I have never liked, even since Dungeons and Dragons. There is a lot of shit here that is specific to Apocalypse World, but I'm really trying to describe these issues with the game system in a broader sense and take that step back. But let's talk about fucking. Why the fuck would having recently gotten laid give one of the character classes, the Gunlugger, a bonus on their next roll? Is this just a mechanical inducement, again at that meta level that breaks immersion, to have people fuck around in character and to spawn romantic high school drama? What's that got to do with the post-apocalypse? How does it make sense? Each and every playbook is riddled with nonsense of this kind, or things that make the openness of what I believe a game should be more difficult. It's less free, not more free, and the whole point of narrative mechanics is meant to be freeing. The other huge problem with these set moves is that they're a bit of a throwback to very old RPGs, where different things you did might have entirely different rules. A percentile here, a 1 in 6 chance there, roll d20 under something here, roll d20 over something there. Whereas today, thankfully, most games operate under a unified rules set, with pretty much everything working under a single unified way of doing things. With every single move empowered by the Apocalypse operating differently, you are required to do a lot of referencing in what is supposed to be a rules-light game, and this is a constant plague in so-called rules-light games, where the necessity of reference and the complex interaction of different capabilities, abilities, special powers, or whatever rapidly turns what's supposed to be a rules-light game into a rules-heavy, flip-through-the-book constantly game. It can become laborious. Less so for the players, who are blessed and cursed with having all the things that they're allowed to do spelt out very specifically on their sheet, but more of a burden for the GM. These playbooks are a sort of paint over the cracks for an inherent design flaw in the game as a whole. More weirdness, helping or hindering other people, so like lending aid to another player to help them accomplish a task, for example, is based on your relationship with them, not your applicable statistic or skill or whatever else relating to the task at hand. So, let's say you were trying to move a really heavy object, a boulder or something, blocking the road. You would be better off asking your girlfriend, Noodle Arms McGillicuddy, to help you move it than you would Chad Meatloaf, the powerlifter. Make it make sense. Honestly, I've already had enough of this. I could complain for weeks, and I have, years even. Apocalypse World is complex where it should be simple, simple where it should be complex. It lacks granularity, and so the mechanics have very little meaning. The moves make it inflexible and sabotage the immersion that I want out of a game, and also the amount of referencing that has to go on for all the moves, it makes it harder to play. Many other choices throughout the game disempower not just the games master, which seems to be a goal for certain narrative RPGs, but the players as well. Or at least it fails to provide a way for a GM to determine or moderate player action through the system, forcing the games master to make direct choices and to seem like a dick, potentially, if you go against what the players say, rather than them having failed a role. And it's even worse for enemies or NPCs or other forces and factions in the world which are so loosely defined as to be meaningless. Other games do this whole the player always rolls thing a lot better. The Cypher system, for example, does it a lot better, or even, God help us, Morgborg does it better. Relying on players fucking up just often doesn't make any sense. There are 2, maybe 3 ideas I could take from this game. The dice results, maybe, you know, the no and the yes and the idea of bargains, but I can't really see an immersive way to do bargains, you know, succeed at a cost, but that's something that's turned up in other non-Apocalypse World games, and it still has the same problem there. The clocks, they're kind of annoying in the way that they're presented, but I can see the usefulness if they were to be used some other way. And there are games that do things like dice counters, yeah. So that works alright. This just doesn't fucking do what I want from an RPG, and it actively seems to set out to get in the way of what I want from an RPG constantly and consistently. The versions that I find remotely playable take it back to a more conventional RPG structure and mode of play, and then kind of what's the point of view then? It's not for me. That's fine. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't do what I want it to do or need it to do in order to enjoy it. I can force it, as I did when we were playing Candela Obscura, but that was incredibly stressful to run as a games master because the system wasn't there as a moderating influence between me and the players very much. It was largely his grim story time. I had no cover. I had no excuse. Candela Obscura uses a derivative of Blades in the Dark, which is a derivative of Powered by the Apocalypse, but many of the same problems with the game system pass through all of these different parts. And as I said earlier, my God, have I tried. I have listened to actual plays, podcasts, read endless forum posts and other things about the game, read explainers, listened to explainers, watched YouTube videos praising it to the high heavens, waded through dissertation-sized YouTube comments on other videos where I've dared to diss Apocalypse World, that explaining it to me as if I were a child. I get it, but I don't get it, right? I understand how it works, but it doesn't do it for me. It's not enjoyable. It doesn't provide what I want or need from a game, either as a games master or a player. And it would have to be fundamentally changed from what it is for me to enjoy the damn thing in any way. If you want to play a meta game, a narrative level game, playing a writer, writing a character, or trying to influence a group story in that writer's room, rather than as an actor playing a character, then this might be for you. To me, this misses the point, in pretty much the same way that people who concentrate on system mastery and character builds, I feel that they're missing the point in a similar way. They're playing the system rather than the game, and Apocalypse World plays the narrative rather than the game. It's playing at the game, not playing the game. I freaking hate this thing. It frustrates me. I don't really think that this qualifies as a role-playing game because it's played at that meta level, and it lacks that immersive point of view and structure that is why I roleplay. So, you know what? Fuck this game. No Zang for you today. Sup, bitches? I'm reliably informed that I'm terrible at pimping my stuff. So here I am, pimping my stuff in what's hopefully an amusing way. If you want to interact with me and follow me, you can find me on Twitter @Grimasaur and @Mort_post for official announcements.
Well, I look at it myself as the beginning, really, of an exploration. That's the reason we're exploring. You don't know what you'll run into on an exploration. What the sky looks like, what the stars look like. Do they still twinkle, or are they a steady light when you get outside the atmosphere?